I swear I say this every time, but this one for sure is the hardest style study that I've ever done. Hey guys, it's Srish back at it again with yet another style study. Before we jump in, I just really quickly want to say thank you so much for everyone who has subscribed and liked and commented on all my previous videos. You guys make me want to fly. Today's video was requested by absolutely no one, but I am obsessed with this artist and I figured you guys might be as well, and there is a lot to learn, so today we're going to study American artist Jennie, who is better known by her online name Jyundee. I think I'm saying that right. As with every style study, today's video is going to be a three-part kind of deal. In part one, we will analyze the style and the work of Jennie and see what we can learn from it. In part two, we will be taking it back to a classic style study and doing an actual study of one of Jennie's paintings. The reference I chose was this one. And in part three, we're going to apply everything that we've learned in our style study into an original painting, as always. Before we dive in, please remember to give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already. It helps me out so much. But with all of that said, grab a snack, sit back, and let's jump into another style study featuring Jyundee. Quick disclaimer, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to call her Jennie because I'm probably saying Jyundee wrong. Also, fair warning, I have had an allergic cold all day yesterday and you can hear it in my voice a little bit today. Is it possible to develop an allergy to your dog's fur 6 years after you've had him? Because it sure looks like it. But yeah, sorry if your voice sounds a little nasal or blocked up. My immune system was in hyperdrive yesterday. But anyway, let's dive into this style study. Jennie is an illustrator and digital artist based in the US. If you've been anywhere on the internet art scene, you've probably come across her work. Her gorgeous art has garnered over 190,000 subscribers on YouTube alone and over 300,000 followers on Instagram. Although Jennie's identity isn't too much of a secret, unlike one other artist that has been on this series, she doesn't share too many personal posts on her social media. In fact, the only thing with her face on it that I could find was this Tune Me challenge that she shared on her Twitter back in January. But luckily for us, we're not here to study her face, but her work, which there is an abundance of. Now, this was probably the toughest style study for me personally because Jennie's art is like the polar opposite of mine. Kind of like how when Aang, an airbender, had to learn earthbending, which was the polar opposite of his innate talents. You see, I love my hard edges, sharp details, and extremely realistic elements. Jennie's art, however, has the opposite of all of these things. One look at her work and it is so soft and ethereal. If watercolor and soft airbrush had a love child, it would be a Jyundee painting. So to make sure I wasn't setting myself up to fail, I did watch some of her tutorials. I know I don't usually do that with style studies, but bear with me. Now, in our previous style studies, we've usually cracked the code during part 2, the study, or towards the end of part 1, right? With Ross Draws, it was the sharpen filter. With Shell E, it was the soft airbrush layer. But here, I found that the very beginning of Jennie's work is where the key factor comes in. It'll make sense in just a second, I promise. But without much further ado, let's dive right into part 1. Now, I want to make a list joke, but I feel like at this point on this channel, it's like flogging a dead horse. But it's gotten to a point where my brain simply won't function without an itemized checklist. So here are 5 key characteristics of Jennie's work. Jenny's character aesthetic is something I like to call semi-realistic manga minus the eyes. I know what you're thinking, Srish, manga is in the eyes. That's where you're mistaken, my friend. Well, that was where I was mistaken anyway. You see, the entire point of the manga aesthetic is to soften and tone down the human face, making it look more childlike. I explained this more in previous style studies, so I won't go over it again in too much detail. Watch those ones if you want to know more. But in essence, yes, the manga eyes are unforgettable. But manga proportions also include a tiny nose, a soft narrow jaw, and flawless skin. In Jenny's work, you'll see the latter characteristics shine through, but she doesn't go all out with the eyes. The eyes are generally quite far apart and have this soft diamond shape. The irises are usually light, or at least light enough that the pupil is clearly visible. The characters have small noses, and while it isn't quite Ross Draws levels of minimization, the nose bridge is still quite understated and very softly indicated. No hard edges. The lips are probably the most realistic part of Jenny's portraits because you can actually see some texture in them. And as we discussed, these characters have a soft, rounded jaw that culminates in a narrow chin. Now, a majority of Jenny's tutorials start with a sketch already in place. The reason I mention this is because a lot of the times it is easy to feel defeated before you even try someone's tutorials out because your sketch likely looks nothing like theirs to begin with. So don't worry, I'm going to show you all the ugly stages of the sketching phase during part 2, but Jenny usually begins with clean line art. Now, all her paintings start with soft airbrushed values, so she generally does keep the sketch on a separate layer. Though it isn't usually involved in the final painting, the line art plays a crucial role in reminding you of where everything is, at least until the hard edges come in much later in the process. But first, let's talk about the softer edges. Now, this is my kryptonite. You already know I have a strained relationship with the airbrush tool. It has no set boundaries, it doesn't create an even flow of color. I cannot control it and I hate it. Oh god, I hate it so much. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I decided to swallow my pride and anger and actually create a begrudging friendship with the soft airbrush tool. Because you see, Jenny's art above all else is soft. Seriously, look at my notes for this video. Yeah, you'll find that there are no hard shadows on the character's skin. Everything is a soft gradient. There are some subtle hard edges though, and we'll get to that in a moment, but Jenny loves her soft blends. But another huge thing I noticed with Jenny's work is that apart from the face and the skin, the rest of the painting is rather flat. Well, not single color flat, but with pretty much most other elements, you can basically point out one highlight color, one midtone, and one shadow color. In other words, the skin and eyes are the only truly realistic parts. Everything else is pretty sketchy or flat. This to me feels very Art Nouveau. It is such a subtle strategy because your eye is immediately drawn to the fully rendered bit, i.e. the face, and all other elements simply fade into the background. I love finding this kind of thing in art. I'm a total geek for strategic painting, but the key here is that there is little to no blending in the background elements, or even the hair for that matter. The only proper soft blending and realism is in the face, really. Now this is where we begin to chip away at the line art. We needed it so far because soft gradients don't really tell us where the edges are, but now once we've gone through and done all of that airbrush work, now we can begin to define some of the harder edges, thank God. But even for the harsher details, Jenny tends to use a very translucent brush. Now, she generally works with Metabang and I use Photoshop, so this is just my guesstimate, but I'm gonna say she uses a pressure opacity hard round brush. I actually talked about this brush in my video on how to paint better skin, which I have linked in the cards in the top right corner. You should check it out because I've also put the same exact brush in the video description for you to download. So anyway, the point is, even with the hard edges, Jenny doesn't use very bold lines. It's all still rather soft. I think the thinnest, finest detail in Jenny's work is generally the eyelashes, but even those are quite thick with 3 C's. In other words, there are pretty much no ultra fine details, but in general you'll find dark lines around the eyes, in the nostrils and under the jaw. These are basically the only elements of the line art that she still keeps in the final product. But let's look at some of the more subtle hard edges. Like we saw before, there is little to no blending in the background elements, so there are loads of hard edges between the different values in, say, the hair or the plants or even the character's clothing. In the skin itself, hard edges are even harder to detect, but they are there. You see, Jenny uses hard edges around the corners of the nose, in the edges of the eye socket, and anywhere you would see specular highlights. But these are so purposefully placed, you almost don't see them. And that is what makes her work look so polished despite being so soft. It's in the secret hard edges. I'll show you how to cheat the secret hard edges in part 2, but for now, let's look at number 5. Alright, this is a huge part of Jenny's work. The background is usually quite a lot darker and tends to frame the character. There is generally a ton of natural elements, trees, leaves, animals and skies, though you do have the occasional indoor scene. But here is yet another secret trick that you wouldn't normally notice. Jenny doesn't really render every single background element. Sure, you'll see that everything has shading, but it isn't rendered to look realistic. Here's what I mean. Here is how I would render a basic leaf. I look at where the light would hit the surface, which parts would be sunken, and where the midtones would go. Now, here is how Jenny would paint leaves in the background. She starts with a dark shadow color and a scatter leaf brush. You can find these online, there are loads of them. And then she locks the transparency and paints over the silhouette with a soft airbrush and a lighter color. The silhouette gives you the impression of actual leaves, but this gradient, non-rendered shading keeps it all soft. As a result, although there is movement in the background, thanks to the smaller shapes of the silhouette, it doesn't draw too much attention, allowing the character to remain the main focus of the painting. Here are some background elements she has painted in this way. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So, to sum up the analysis portion of this video, Jenny's style can be broken down into these 5 points. Number 1. The proportions that are quite reminiscent of semi-realistic manga, minus the eyes. 2. The sketch plays a super important part in the painting, and some of it even makes it into the final painting. Number 3. Everything starts as a softly airbrushed gradient. 4. There are loads of hard edges, though these are subtle and often imperceptible. And finally, number 5. Background elements are given realistic silhouettes, but generally soft gradient shading instead of actual rendering. So for the study portion of this video, I picked a very simple one of Jenny's paintings to study. This was actually part of an eyebrow tutorial, but it is simple enough that we can do a quick study on it. As I mentioned before, Jenny usually skips the sketching portion of her work on her YouTube videos. She does have a line art tutorial though. But this isn't just a Jenny thing, it's a general art thing. People usually skip the sketching portion and speed paints. I know I do it all the time, because it's not the most exciting bit. But this can often be discouraging to the viewer, because our line art never starts out looking that clean. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I just want you guys to know that no one's line art starts out looking that clean, yeah? In fact, I've learned over time that it takes at least 3 sketchy iterations before I can even begin to create proper line art. Just wanted to put that out there. No matter how good you are as an artist, your sketches will never start perfectly clean. Okay, now you can relax. The other thing about Jenny's art that I only realized in this part of the study was that in general she uses quite a warm light, often a salmony orangey light, with cooler toned bluish violetish shadows. I started by flattening in a general skin tone layer, then airbrushed in the deepest shadows. Then I picked a mid-tone color and airbrushed those in. A great tip is to have the eyedropper tool handy. I have it as a hotkey on my tablet. This helps you quickly pick up colors from the canvas rather than having to go into the palette all the time trying to pick the right colors from there. And especially since we're looking for a super soft blend, the eyedropper tool is an invaluable asset. Now for the biggest tip I can give you for this style study, let's look at those subtle hard edges. Because we're using a soft airbrush still, it is pretty much impossible to get hard edges out of this thing. Trust me, I tried. But we're not going to use a hard brush until later, because that's the challenge, right? So here's how you can create that hard edge. The lasso tool. Say I want to create a hard edge under the shadow of the nose. I'm going to grab the lasso tool and outline the shadow. I hit Ctrl H to hide the lasso selection, just so it isn't blocking my view. Now, with a highlight color, I airbrush from the lassoed edge downwards. The lasso creates that hard edge for me, but because I'm still using a soft airbrush, the bottom of it is still going to be properly gradiated and blended. Let's try it again with the under eye bags. I pick a highlight color again, lasso the area just under the eye bags. Now I airbrush the highlight into the lassoed area and voila! We have one hard edge, but the other edges are all softly blended. And once I've finished properly rendering the skin, then and only then do I go in and add the dark, sharper details, such as the eyebrows and the lashes and the defined jawline and such. So here's the final painting I ended up with. Pretty close, I would say. Alrighty, we're finally at the home stretch. So for the original painting this week, I decided to go with a concept that I've had in mind for a while. If you followed my work, you know that I've painted both Mercury and Venus as the old deities. So for this video, I decided now is a good time as any to expand the series and paint Mars, but in the style of Jyundee. Now, seeing as Jenny, like myself, predominantly paints feminine characters, it was quite hard to find a male reference for this piece. But here on this channel, we love a good challenge, so this was actually quite a fun little test for me to use female references while still keeping the character masculine. As always, this painting is available as downloads and wallpapers along with all of my other art over on my Patreon. Grab some cool exclusive perks, support the channel, it helps me out a lot. Maybe I can get cold medicine now. But yeah, here's the final painting that I ended up with. So there we go, Jyundee demystified. I hope you've enjoyed this video and that it's been helpful, and if you have, then please remember to give me a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button down below because I post new videos every single week. Comment down below if there are other artists you want me to cover on this series. I do have an ever-growing list, so I will add it to it. I don't know when it will come out, but I promise you I will get into it. Check out the rest of my style study videos. I will put a playlist somewhere around here. I promise they're all really, really good and there is a lot to learn from every single style study, so make sure you check them all out over there. But with all of that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as I have, and I will see you guys on the next one. Bye!